when you started. Um, so yeah, welcome back to Unit 6. This is going to be the second part. Um, so, about us, I'm sure you guys have heard of 5 already. If not, we are a volunteering organization. We do stuff, fun stuff like review sessions, plural. If you're interested in joining, feel free to apply. It's on a rolling basis. Of course, there's going to be a feedback survey. It's greatly appreciated to help me improve, and I do read through that feedback whenever I get some. Complimentary disclaimer: College Board is not affiliated with us, and is not endorsed by. We're not endorsed by College Board. Expectations: please be respectful. The lecture is being recorded, so you don't have to stay throughout the entire time. Yeah. So this was the agenda we went through yesterday. And we're going to pick up at 6.8. Oops. Hold on. Stream is not working. Hold on. Let me get that fixed. It's a great day to have a technical issue. It's not, actually. There we go. Now there's the agenda. This is what we're going over today. So yeah. And we will pick up Unit 7 in a single day, but I'm going to split up that lecture. I will also start Unit 8 on that same day, so it's going to be a fun day. Alright, let's get started with immigration. So during the Gilded Age, as always with any kind of revolution, industrial kind of revolution, like the market revolution, not necessarily industrial, but you get what I mean, we'll see a large influx of immigrants. I mentioned that when I talked about labor. Such a large influx of immigrants from Asia and now more different parts of Europe. So not just the western parts of Europe, but also central, eastern, and southern parts of Europe. You're going to get a diverse workforce. You're also going to see huge cities. In addition, we will see internal migration towards these big cities. We call this process urbanization. And throughout this second industrial revolution, we're going to see very huge cities that will sometimes trail out into suburbs. The reason why these suburbs exist, well, it's more viable to have to go from one point in a suburb to the actual main city where you work. And the reason why this is more viable is transportation such as automobiles. In addition, we're going to see tall skyscrapers dominate the kind of landscape of these big cities like New York City. This is also made possible by technological innovation. I mentioned the elevator before, and as well as the Bessemer process, which would make construction quite easy compared to previous eras in U.S. history. In these big cities, you're going to see the rise of ethnic enclaves. For example, you're going to see the rise of an Italian community in New York City. I included a picture of it here, Mulberry Street, that is in Little Italy. I also included pictures of Japanese and Chinese communities, both of those being in the West Coast, California, Washington, Oregon, that area. Yeah. As speaking of immigrants, like Chinese, Japanese, and all that, you should know that aside from the Irish and German immigration waves, you're also going to see the rise of even more Catholic and more Jewish immigrants coming from Eastern and Southern Europe. So, for example, you're going to see the rise of Italian communities. I already mentioned that before. You'll see Russian communities as well, and also Polish communities. The main link is that the Italians are going to be mainly Catholic, like the Irish. The Russian and Polish immigrants are going to be more likely to be Jewish immigrants. As for the Asian side of things, for the most part, we're going to see a lot more Chinese and Japanese immigrants, East Asian immigration in this era. Now, the key reasons why we see these immigration waves is poverty and religious persecution and just the hope of better economic conditions. So, in the case of Asians, such as Chinese immigrants, they would be escaping poverty, they would be looking for better economic conditions. As for the Catholics, Catholic Italians, they might be facing poverty as well, similar conditions as that of Asians. But the religious persecution is most relevant to Russian and Polish immigrants, particularly Russia, because Russia seemed to love its pogroms. And if you don't know what pogroms are, just essentially one of those, weekly or monthly occurrences where mobs would, assault Jewish residents. So, yeah, you start to get sick and tired of all that. And, well, when you hear of America, it's a new place, and as always with other immigrants, you'll think that there will be better economic opportunities. Again, these Jewish immigrants also will face poverty in their home countries. Are there any questions about immigration itself? The recorded lectures will be on they will be on the 5 Hive lecture schedule. Looks like there are no other questions. When does Ellis Island come into play? Well, here's the thing. Ellis Island is pretty much going to be the one huge place that most immigrants will come through. It's this time. Like in this period, Ellis Island is going to be like the one-stop shop for the destination of many immigrants, and most of them are going to end up settling in New York City. Now, there were attempts to open up more areas, such as the Galveston area, Texas, but that doesn't really see a lot of arrivals from immigration. As for the Asian immigrants, they will mainly arrive in areas like San Francisco. So if you want to know the West Coast version, that will be San Francisco. All right. Let's move on to responses to immigration. So for the most part, there are going to be 3 kinds of responses. I like to categorize them. First one, we've mentioned before, social Darwinism. Basically, the belief of social Darwinism is that, at least in the context when we mentioned it yesterday, it was in the context of economics. Social Darwinism being the idea that, these people are successful economically by natural selection. Pretty much a similar idea in this time applied to race. Huge proponents of social Darwinism are going to be Herbert Spencer and William Graham Sumner, who, by the way, was a Yale professor, so if you have another reason to hate Yale, there's that. I can name a couple as well. Anyways, social Darwinism will give rise to eugenics movements, stuff like that. With the eugenics movement, as well as the belief of racial superiority, you're going to see some pretty hostile responses to immigration, particularly to Asian immigrants. In fact, the only things that College Board seemed to mention regarding hostile responses involve the Chinese immigrants. So, for instance, in terms of legislation or the stuff that happened in government, both in the federal level and the state level. In the federal level, we passed the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, which was essentially a 10-year ban on Chinese immigration. We ended up extending it for another 10 years with the Geary Act in 1892. It will get a whole lot worse in the 1920s when we discuss immigration in that era. Another piece of legislation, the Contract Labor Law in 1885, is going to limit Chinese laborers from coming over to the U.S., which in local terms they refer to these laborers as coolies. You'll actually see a lot of anti-coolie laws in this era. You also see some Supreme Court cases involving Chinese immigrants as well as their children. So, for example, in the U.S. v. Wong Kim Ark case in 1898, Wong Kim Ark is going to argue that he will have birthright citizenship per the 14th Amendment. The Supreme Court will actually agree with him. You'll also have the court case Taipei v. Hurley, which is involving schools in California. The basis of this court case is that, well, you can't discriminate against Chinese kids in the school system. That was what was happening in that court case. So yes, while we did see some successes in the courts in terms of civil rights for Chinese immigrants and Americans, you got the legislations part, which probably outweighs that tenfold. In addition to all this legislation and things going on in the government, you also see the rise of violence as well. I already mentioned in regards to the New South, you'll see lynchings, race riots, and massacres against African Americans. The same thing will happen for Chinese immigrants, Italian immigrants, just any kind of immigrant group as well. It is quite notorious in context of Chinese American studies because, well, LA had a huge massacre, so did Seattle against Chinese Americans. There's like a whole Wikipedia article, I think, on Chinese American massacres and race riots. At the same time, Italians will also be lynched for being simply Catholic. And again, just for this pure racism stuff. Now, not everyone was purely scum. There were some people who would be involved with the reform movement, who will establish settlement houses in urban areas such as Chicago, Boston, Cleveland. And the intentions with these settlement houses are to help immigrants settle into these urban areas. They are more vocational schools, or a little bit more related to vocational schools. Probably the most famous settlement house you guys might remember is Hull House in Chicago, which was founded by Jane Addams. We will actually mention Jane Addams again, because she is an absolutely wonderful person. But other examples of settlement houses that you might be interested: Hiram House in Cleveland and Denison House in Boston. I think I passed by it when I was touring the city before. But do understand that not everyone was a racist scumbag, but there were some people trying to help these immigrants as well. Not only just immigrants themselves, but Americans who were part of the reform movement. Any questions about such responses? Weren't settlement houses really paternalistic about it? Paternalistic in the sense of what, condescending? You'd have to look at several documents in order to really defend that case. Not really. Like for some of these settlement houses like Hull House, their founders, they actually kind of believed in their whatever they were preaching. As for did Hull Houses assimilate immigrants like they did to natives? They didn't really intend on destroying or dismantling culture. They didn't really enforce speak English or you'll die or you're cringe or anything like that. They weren't really into that kind of strict regimen. In addition, these settlement houses had better conditions than boarding schools for natives. Native children genuinely did die in large masses. There's whole mass graves throughout America and Canada. I am not going to leave Canada alone because, yeah, they're pretty much the reason why the Geneva Convention exists. Social Darwinism was always a huge aspect for every unit. Social Darwinism becomes more formalized in Unit 6. But the old racism stuff, it's always been a thing throughout U.S. history. Since Unit 2, Unit 3, Unit 4, and all that. In Unit 5, you'll still always see that kind of racist aspect. that people is nativism the same as social Darwinism? No, not necessarily. Nativism is a response, kind of a movement that seeks to close off, um, well, yes, to close off immigration, um, due to the belief that these incoming immigrants will destroy political and economic structures in the U.S. It is related to social Darwinism, but it is not the same. Good question. Were the working class people also nativists or just the rich people? Some rich people benefited from immigration. I know that, William Graham Sumner was also kind of a rich guy, but also some working class people believed in the nativist movement. Um, Unfortunately, yes, rich people would get cheaper labor from it. Um, Especially if the majority of a good majority of these immigrants are going to come in as unskilled laborers, you're going to pay a lower wage. But yes, for the most part, rich people will benefit from this kind of immigration, while for the most part, working class people will not entirely benefit from it. Um, did the hostile responses include Japanese internment camps? This will be discussed in Unit 7 when we discuss the home front in World War II. Um, I mean, yeah. We don't see concentration camps arise in America except for that kind of moment, that peak defining moment. But in some ways, we did technically do internment camps already in this era, and that would be the Native Americans. Um, Anyways, I think it's a good time to move on to a quick and short. It's probably not a quick and short. To a relatively short SAQ. Regarding my migration. You'll have 10 minutes to respond to all of the following parts. Please respond to it as if you are responding to a real SAQ on the exam. Feel free to ask me any questions. For those of you watching the recording, feel free to pause here and give yourself 10 minutes for that, and then skip forward 10 minutes when we go through. So yeah, right now it's 5:19. We're gonna regroup at 5:29. Again, if you have questions, feel free to ask. It seems that the SAQ always kills participation in these lectures. It is almost halfway through. How are people going? So, for those of you who just put in a few phrases, I'm not getting much, out of that because you're not really showing me whether or not you understand some of these processes. So, Riot, I think your responses, your part A and B, are backwards. Um, part A is about migration, part B is about immigration. There is a difference between the two. As for your part C, you should explain how businessmen and larger corporations appealed to immigration, what they did to promote that kind of thing. And then as for your working class, you should explain how they opposed immigrants. You're giving me the why, which is a good start, but I'm not getting the how. Um, Same case for you, Cirque. I think you swapped your A and B, your parts A and B, regarding migration and immigration. I see you're making a comparison, a similarity comparison in part C, which is a good approach in regards to Chinese immigrants. Um, However, let's see. You need to specify this kind of legislation. How What did the legislation do? Because just legislation is vague. If you mention the Chinese Exclusion Act, that would have been sufficient. For people who lived in response to by directly attacking those immigrants, even though I did not give you any specific examples, it would be better if you did know one off the top of your mind. We have 1 minute left, so if you are still working on it, pick up the pace because we're going to continue on. And for those of you who haven't gotten feedback from me, I apologize, but we got to keep the train moving. Editing on your phone kind of sucks. That is okay. You don't have to do it. It's good. It's all good. It is 5:29. Please post your responses now. And I will take probably 5 minutes to look through them, aside from the ones I've already looked at. Uh, um, I know someone is still typing. I don't know if for the rest of you if you are did not do the SAQ or are still working on the SAQ, but time is up. The timing is rounded down. Particularly because this is a no stimulus prompt. That's why I rounded it down. You did B first. Gilded Age in the U.S. and the Gilded Age was characterized by extravagance playing. The human this was the image that immigrants saw in the U.S. and the opportunities that they thought it offered. So, I mean, you're kind of using a little bit of, you are mentioning kind of the economics, but I think you have to be a bit more specific regarding the economics of the Gilded Age. You have to be particular with that. As for industrialization influenced the migration by creating opportunities, you need to explain the kind of reasons why migrants would want to chase these opportunities, other than industrialization. Or you need to specify what kinds of opportunities are being created, explain why the industrialization is a pull factor for them. Even if it says describe, you're you have to kind of go a little bit beyond that to really get that point in. Nativists didn't like it. Many people like Boss Street saw the opportunities. Alright, no problem. Yes, I see the comparison between nativists and political machines. I'm assuming you also ran out of time. You would have to explain a little bit more about Boss Tweed and like political machines, the kinds of opportunities that came out of immigrants. But that is a good piece of evidence to draw up, even though we haven't really talked about it extensively. We won't really. Okay, are there any questions about the SAQ? As for Flora, I think this is the part A you gave me. No, this is the entire thing. From 1865 in economics. Offered free land, westward expansion, and created factory jobs that attracted Europeans. The nativists and opposed that. They feared that immigrants would take jobs from northern laborers. Okay. I'm seeing some good points. You are bringing up. I think the only thing you're lacking is kind of the thorough explanation in regards to your part B. Your part A is good. I like it. Um, your part C is okay. I think it's very likely to get the point. But for part B, you don't really have to do bullet points A, B, and C. That's something I prefer because it makes it easier to read through. Um, but if you don't want to do that, it's your choice. I don't really care whether or not you do bullet points or not. So the time frame of Unit 6 is going to be from 1865 to 1898. Sometimes College Board will put the cutoff at 1900 because those 2 extra years is just it doesn't really matter that much. It seems like College Board agrees with that sentiment. So yeah. All right. Before I talk about all this fun stuff, any more questions? The 2 extra are just Spanish American War and nothing else of much significance. Yes, it's basically a little segue into imperialism, and we already see the beginning of that happen in this unit, which is the Alaska and the Hawaiian ordeal. Um, yes, they are squarely in that era. So I think we will get to that. I don't think. Yes, it's in a later unit. I mean topic. But yes, the only thing that kind of sets out those 2 years is just the Spanish American War, I believe. So, yeah. Unit 6 and Unit 7 tends to blend very well because of the populist to progressive transition. But enough of that. Let's move on to the development of the middle class. All right. So I already mentioned that the middle class in Unit 4 that the middle class starts to grow a little bit. We see the rise of it. However, after the Civil War, oh, we really see a middle class. The middle class that we actually know to this modern day. The reason why we see the development of the middle class, we will see more clerical jobs as we see more factories, more shipments, a more national like economy, huge trusts and corporations. That requires people who keep records straight. We need more bookkeepers. We got to need more managers, more secretaries, and these are pretty well-paying jobs in a lot of ways. But in addition, these jobs would not be possible without education. We will see a push for education starting in 1862, most significantly when we see the passage of the Moral Land Grant Act. And what that does is just giving a bunch of federal land for public universities. In addition, alongside these public universities, which would normally just be open to men, we will also see educational opportunities for women. So, such as the Seven Sisters Colleges, such as Radcliffe College, which is now part of Harvard because they integrated that, Barnard College, which I believe is part of Columbia, Wellesley College, Vassar College, Mount Holyoke College, Smith College, and the last college I don't remember the name of quite well because it's a weird name. I think it's like Bearn something. Starts with Bearn. But yes, the key takeaway is that men and women would be able to take up these clerical jobs and to enjoy kind of a more stable wage. So with these higher wages compared to the working class, well, they have extra money, and you know what they're gonna spend it on? They're gonna spend it on leisure and consume stuff. For example, you're gonna see the rise of department stores such as Macy's and Marshall Fields. Uh, Men and women, well, particularly most likely women, would shop around these department stores, big department stores, by the way. But also men would do it too. You would also see the rise of sporting events such as baseball. You'll see the creation of baseball teams like the New York Gothams, which would become the New York Giants, which would become the San Francisco Giants. Again, whole baseball history you don't need to know, but you need to know that we'll see the rise of huge fun sporting events as a result of, having a lot more money, time more money on your hands. You also see more fun dances, circuses, amusement parks like Six Flags. You'll also see the rise of American theater, finally. You'll see vaudeville shows. You'll see the rise of Vaudeville shows will be the most popular, as opposed to the racist type minstrel shows. Um, these vaudeville shows will also be kind of like a little branch of American theater as a whole that we will see rise up in the 20th century under Eugene O'Neill. That's not really important to know. I just like talking about literature. But again, you don't need to know any particular specifics about leisure and consumption. Those are just examples: department stores, amusement parks, theater, sports. Finally, we also in respect to wealth, not just about the wealth of middle class. I want to talk about the wealth of uh, high business elites, not business elites who did weed, just business elites who were like high class. Um, for example, I want to talk about Carnegie. He was a very rich dude, and that's a bit of an understatement. He was an incredibly rich man. He owned Carnegie Steel. He owned that whole kind of trust. But what did he really do with it? Well, his kind of economic philosophy was rather interesting, and it involved philanthropy. Uh, and this is all symbolized in, or all kind of declared in his Gospel of Wealth, which you can still read. Basically, the key idea behind the Gospel of Wealth was that Carnegie asserted that rich business people have a duty to spend their money, their excess wealth, for the betterment of society. That was his genuine belief. And I say it's genuine because he actually followed through on that. He invested in education a lot. He invested in Carnegie libraries. The first one will be in Scotland because he was a Scottish immigrant. But the first Carnegie library will be built in Braddock, Pennsylvania. Um, you'll see a whole lot of these libraries throughout America, um, as well as Britain. It's not just America. You'll also see Carnegie Mellon University specifically. He will actually help be a founder of Carnegie Institute of Technology. And eventually that institute will merge with the Mellon Institute, which will form the modern day Carnegie Mellon University campus. Um, but Carnegie was not the only guy who kind of did all this. Another man who kind of invested or donated to a university was Washington Duke, uh, who was big on tobacco. So if you go to Duke University, just know that your university is named after a man who was really big on tobacco industry, which would be a fun fact to bring up. Uh, I also want to mention Rockefeller, kind of the other side of things regarding integration, right? Remember that Carnegie was vertical integration. Rockefeller, not entirely great in terms of morals in regards to horizontal integration, but he was also a philanthropist at the time. He was actually really big on medical sciences. He invested in a lot of medical research. In fact, he will found the Rockefeller Foundation, which to this day is really important in in funding medical research. But those are just the three examples. There are plenty of philanthropists throughout this day and age. Of course, we see philanthropists in our modern day, so that hasn't changed. Um, so yeah, let's move on very quickly to reform. I'll take questions after this. So reform. We will see the return of reform in this unit after Unit 4's kind of stint with reform. But this time, it's going to be pretty strong. Why? Because we're going to see a lot of publications on reform. For example, I included Henry George, who was considered a reformer. The front cover of Progress and Poverty. Basically, the key thing about Progress and Poverty was the idea of proposing a single tax on land values, the idea that people should own their own things. Wow, no duh. Except for land. And land would be the only thing that people would pay tax. He was rather libertarian at the time, but since this kind of proposal was rather new for American society and economy as a whole, he believed it would be really beneficial. It's a form of reform. It's a reform movement. Georgism. If you're interested in learning more about Georgism as an economic philosophy, feel free to read it on your own. I won't explain the whole, weeds behind it. And we need to move on to another person who would be considered an economic philosopher, Lawrence Gronlund. He's going to be a Danish immigrant. who will write the Cooperative Commonwealth. Basically, the Cooperative Commonwealth is going to take the kind of socialist ideas that Karl Marx will write on, and he's going to rewrite it as a peaceful kind of transformation. He believed that the kind of social equality for the working class would be brought in peaceful means rather than Karl Marx straight up saying there will be violence, which will attract quite a lot of Americans. A lot of socialist leaders, such as Eugene V. Debs, who was the leader of the Pullman strike. We will, and actually, the next thing I'm going to talk about, the next publication, is actually kind of similarly related to the Cooperative Commonwealth in regards to labor. Edward Bellamy's Looking Backward. Basically, it's kind of like a dystopian utopian novel. It involves time travel to the year 2000, which is quite interesting. But the key principle is that, in the year 2000, things are going to be really bad for American society because we continue this kind of vices and that we continue to see in American society, such as greed, mainly. Now, speaking of vices in American society, let's talk about Christians, the social gospel. Now, the social gospel is going to be kind of a movement, kind of a third great awakening, so to speak, and this is going to be perpetuated by reverends such as Walter Rauschenbusch. Sorry, I butchered that on every level. Also, Washington Gladden. These reverends are going to focus on supporting urban neighborhoods and improving their conditions, as well as combating social ills such as drinking, alcohol, as well as greed as a whole. Their main goals in their kind of movement was the social gospel movement. I'm speaking. It was to alleviate poverty because they believed that poverty would lead to kind of sinful behavior, a desire to do something sinful in order for their self-benefit. They wanted to, in tangent to that, they also wanted to get better conditions for workers as a whole, for the poor. They also hated child labor, and to be honest, me too, man. Again, all of this for moral reasons, which is quite similar to the Second Great Awakening being quite important for the Reform movement in Unit 4. However, in this Third Great Awakening, it's pretty much a Reform movement. In addition to that, we will also see the rise of muckrakers, such as Ida B. Wells. Yesterday, I mentioned her as a muckraker for exposing lynchings and violence as an African-American journalist. She will also be involved with labor. The other muckraker I want to talk about is Jacob Riis. I included a photo that he took in New York, I think. Yes, this is about New York. And the book, How the Other Half Lives, it's basically a form of photojournalism, where he'll take a bunch of photos of daily life in New York City regarding the working class. As you can see in this photo, that doesn't look like something you want to live in. So when people see this, and they will actually be exposed to the conditions that working class people were exposed to, well, they're going to adopt a pretty similar platform of that of the social gospel movement. Photojournalism will actually be quite important for a variety of reasons. Not only for that it is something real, tangible that you can look at rather than just read, but also it is a genuine capture of, something rather than just a painting. I do also want to talk about women in reform because they are very important. For example, I talked about the social gospel movement. I also mentioned alcohol. Yeah, women are going to be very important in the temperance movement. We are going to see entire societies such as Women's Christian Temperance Union. We're also going to see Carrie Nation, who I included here. If you've watched Oversimplified's video on Prohibition, you probably already know what she did. She straight up destroyed bars throughout the West in the name of temperance. You'll also see another woman named Frances Willard, who will also be promoting temperance as well. I mentioned Ida B. Wells. She was a woman as well who promoted reform for social justice. Mary Church Terrell will also adopt a similar platform. Jane Addams was also a social worker. She was also involved with the labor movement as kind of as a friend. I I also do want to make mention of this because I mentioned that Native Americans will lose out their kind of violent resistance against the American government after the Wounded Knee Massacre. That doesn't mean that there aren't any kind of movements from the Native American groups. So, for an example of a Native American woman who will advocate for Native American rights is going to be Zitkalasa. I'm pretty sure I butchered that because I don't know what language that is particularly. But yeah. Any questions about reform? We're all philanthropists inspired by Carnegie's Gospel of Wealth. Not necessarily. For example, Rockefeller is actually going to make his philanthropist decision based on the advice of a man by the name whose last name is Gates. So yeah. As for like anyone else, anyone who could have been possibly inspired for the Gospel of Wealth, that might have been a real possibility. I just don't know the personal lives of like Vanderbilt or Washington Duke or all that. I'm not a biographer in that sense. But if you're interested in it, that would be a niche research. As for the question Flora posted, was The Jungle by Upton Sinclair written during Unit 6? No, I don't think so. I don't know the exact year of its publication. But I'm pretty sure Upton Sinclair wasn't entirely active. Let me just take a look, particularly when it was published. He did run for California as governor, which is an interesting thing. It should have been during Teddy Roosevelt's, yes, so that would have been the 20th century. Yes. Okay, yeah. It was published in 1906. That was squarely in Unit 7 during the Progressive Movement. I thought so. Yes, during Teddy Roosevelt. It was a reaction to his all pushing that legislation regarding the meatpacking industries was a reaction to the jungle, which is rather disgusting. Don't read it unless you are morbidly fascinated. You can read other Upton Sinclair novels that are criticisms of industries such as the oil industry. In fact, he wrote Oil. Like that. Oil is actually going to be an inspiration for one of my favorite movies. So if you're interested in that, just feel free to shoot the breeze on that. Aside from that, any questions about the middle class, though, rather than reform movements? Oh, wait, that's a question the Gospel of Wealth one was in the development of the middle class, even though it wasn't exactly the middle class. It helped to the middle class in some ways, yes. It is rather morbid. Yes, it is disgusting in some ways when you think about the fact that people are eating that. Did philanthropists support reforms? It's a mixed bag, man. For example, Carnegie, not exactly a big fan of, the middle class. Do they support reforms? Yeah, middle class women who are Christian, majority of Christian middle class people will support those kinds of reform movements. So there's that. Don't tell me to look at it, and I don't expect you to look at it. Okay, don't read through W.B. Du Bois's The Souls of Black Folk and Carter G. Woodson's The Miseducation of the African American. I'm not going to use the N-word because they do use N-word in the titles. It's not academic to do that. Those are interesting reads. Anyways, side tangent. We gotta move on to an SAQ again. Yay, another comparison ones that you guys have to do. So, you guys have 10 minutes as usual. This is a non-stimuli oriented. We'll get to stimuli oriented SAQs the next unit. Because that's where we actually start having pictures. But yeah. As always, 10 minutes. It is 5:52. So we regroup at 6:02. As always, if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Oh my god, it's Luciano. You guys have around 4 minutes left. So I'm reading through your response, Flora. Um, Muckraking journalism is the development you're talking about in response to part A. I see clearly what your response to part B and C are. Um, I don't quite get your first part. Muckraking journalism. Muckraking is the rise. We see the beginning of it. We don't see, because Ida B. Wells is a muckraker, and she's certainly alive in Unit 6, and she'll be doing that for a long while. But we don't really see the muckraker term rise up until Unit 7. I spoke of the beginning of it. Now, you are touching on a good point about corruption and social problems. So think about that if you want to improve your response. Oh, you know what? I did say 1920. Muckraking is fair game. Um, well, in that case, egg on my face. Um, yes, and then muckraking would work. Upton Sinclair's publication about the meat packing industry scared the hell out of people. Interesting way of putting it. 1 minute left. If you're still working on it, you don't have a lot of time left. Oh, 6:02. Never mind. Start posting your responses. But I don't cook in general. So what you could So for part A, I was asking for one development that would influence reform movements as a whole. I think it would have been better to mention ironically it would have been better to be a bit more broad with the muckraking part, um, which is something I never thought I'd say. Yeah. As for your B, I like it. I do. I do. It's good. Your part C. When you speak of civil rights efforts for African Americans, you're talking about the early one. Aim to reduce or eliminate alcohol. Yeah, in some ways, I guess that's fair game because we do see the civil rights movement in that era. All right, I'll stop reading through at 6:08. By the way. Yeah. I saw that. So your argument regarding the development of the middle class, um, I don't know if your explanation of having more money meant that they had more time to devote. Um, I feel like it would be better to talk about kind of the social gospel movement as a whole, the use of religion. Um, for part B, both the settlement house. I see. You did mention the social gospel in part B. So your regard is about the temperance movement. I see. Um, yes, in some ways that would be correct. Um, but it doesn't feel quite strong. Um, the temperance movement I can see, but you'd have to explain the settlement house movement because helping the immigrants and to cure the vice that is intemperate alcoholism is kind of suggesting that every immigrant drank, and that was the main reason why women like Jane Addams would do this. Not exactly true. Do you know what I mean? Not entirely true. It is not entirely great to make that assumption, if you know what I mean. Alcoholism is separated, just that immigrants drinking. Um, I still don't really see that entire clarity there. Because you're suggesting that they both did it. You're referring to it as they, so um, or maybe it was the Christian part. It's a little iffy. Let's move on to part C because I do want to give more feedback to other people. Um, um, so your difference in part C, um, there were a fair number of men who were part of the temperance movement, such as the Anti-Saloon League. Um, so I don't know if I would say heavily dominated by women. Um, I think you were trying to aim for the role of women and men, the difference in that. Um, I think you were aiming for a good thing, a good response, but it just didn't really, it wasn't entirely well executed. Um, Particularly in respect to like the whole, you're kind of simplifying it, the role of women and men in some ways. Um, let's read through this last one. Carrie Chapman Cat. Interesting. So the Enlightenment is really far back. As for the socialism part, um, you're gonna have to explain how socialism will have a big role in the suffrage movement. Um, as for your part B, um, oh, wow, that was the first time I've seen the African school mentioned. Um, I I guess in some ways through depiction, through words or art, is the thing you were aiming for, depicting flaws. But you didn't really mention that explicitly. That would have made it a little bit more clear. Part C. Yes, your part C is good. Partially influenced by domestic assault. Yes. Um, right. Okay. Any questions about this SAQ? Because this was a tricky one. Do I have a big criticism about the length? No, not really. I feel like this is something you could do within a reasonable amount of time. Um, I'm not particularly concerned about the length. Do I think the Ashcan school comparison to Muckrakers landed properly? I think it would have been a little bit more clear if you mentioned the depiction of kind of these social injustices or these fundamental flaws in American society as a side effect of greed. Um, in your first sentence, I think it would have been more clear what kind of comparison you are drawing on. No, they do not separate the time for LEQs and DPQs historically. Um, if you're talking about like the SAQs, LEQs, DBQs, SAQs is going to be in section 1. DBQs and LEQs are going to be in their own section altogether. Unless they changed it for the digital exam. There's a chance they did, but I don't think they did. I know that... No, the MCQ and the SAQ thing is still the same. What you would do is you would do the MCQ, and then you can't move on to the SAQ. Then you start the SAQ all together, and you stop that, and then you have a break. And then you go back. I think that where the breaks are has changed as well, aside from the fact that it's digital. But once again, I am not an AP teacher. I don't have that inside information. They usually tell the AP teachers what's going on. No, LEQs and SAQs are not in the same section. It's the LEQ and the DBQ that will be in the same section. I don't know what your teacher is cooking, but she's certainly burning out something. I just called out a teacher. Anyways, let's move on to the final two topics. Controversies over the role of government. And in my notes, I wrote this as controversies over government. I thought, that's a little early, isn't it? So we need to talk about foreign policies that the government took, as well as the concept of laissez-faire, which we already mentioned in the rise of industrial capitalism. But we're going to talk about that in government, how that played out. So, laissez-faire means to leave alone, or leave to do in French. Key idea was to limit government interference as much as possible and essentially just eliminate it as a whole. Proponents of laissez-faire are going to be called liberals in this era. Proponents of laissez-faire now are called neoliberals. Ronald Reagan is an example of a neoliberal, economic neoliberal, by the way. Economic and political philosophies are not going to be the same terms. Liberals actually hated corruption. One of the things that happens in the Republican Party, at one point there's going to be a liberal Republican platform adopted by Horace Greeley in 1872, kind of a little split. However, that does not impede the Republican control of government throughout this time. Another belief that liberals had was that reform and unions, all those movements, were counterproductive. They thought that they think they're counterproductive because they do involve government interference. And then again, they believe that government interference would upset the economy a lot. They also believed in this idea of the liberty of contract, the notion that the business leaders and the worker has the right to agree to a contract under any terms. This kind of principle will be used by the Supreme Court and any other courts to overturn certain state regulations regarding minimum wage, etc. Now, business leaders will also have a hand in foreign policy, specifically Hawaii in 1893, but there will be some kind of roles to in the federal government to look outside of the U.S., either through territorial acquisition or through trade or through economics. So, what about Alaska? Why did we buy Alaska? There's not really much of an important reason to it, actually, hilariously enough. We simply bought it from Russia in 1867. It was negotiated by the Secretary of State, and yet we still don't really have a valid reason why we bought Alaska. As for Hawaii, we do have a quote-unquote valid reason for the, entire violent coup that we did in Hawaii. Yes, there was a coup in Hawaii in 1893. Trade, yeah, pretty much. Economics, This foreign policy side of things is not going to be the most important thing. It doesn't get mentioned a whole lot in American history, simply because you have the Spanish American War, which is more important in the context of territorial acquisition in this era. But do remember that the U.S. government is not just going to do anything, just do nothing for foreign policy. They are going to do stuff, negotiating stuff in regards to the Pacific front, the side of things. Any questions about that? It's a very small topic. If not, I think it's time to move on to 6.13, which is about politics in the Gilded Age. Hey, look, it's a William Jennings Bryan. Um, so politics. What do you got to know about it? Well, you got to know about three parties. You got to know the two major political parties, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. The Republican Party is going to be more business oriented. The Democratic Party will favor state and local governments. They will argue over issues such as a protective tariff, hard money versus free silver. By the way, the Republicans favored hard money, the Democrats favored free silver, and I will explain why they favored free silver. They both, however, they both will engage with a bit of a system called the spoils system. Not a big fan of it. Why? Because it's not merit based. It's basically just giving offices to people who just support you. This is actually going to bite them in the butt because a president is going to straight up be murdered for it. James Garfield will be assassinated by a disgruntled office guy, a guy who thought he was going to get an office from the spoils system in 1881. This is going to lead to the Pendleton Act in 1883. I am getting a bit ahead of myself. That's under political machines and corruption. The Pendleton Act will dictate that, hey, government positions, yeah, you have to be smart for it. So yeah, it's a merit-based system under the Pendleton Act. Now, the third party is the People's Party. Some people call it the Populists. I prefer to call them the People's Party because that's kind of what they ran by. That's what they were called. The majority of them are going to be farmers. Now, if you remember at the beginning of the unit, we talked about farmers in terms of westward expansion. And you'll probably not remember, but it would be good to remember that there are farming organizations such as the Grange and the Farmers Alliance, who are opposed to systems such as the crop lien system, abuses of the railroad companies. These guys particularly the farmers and the populists, are going to run against these two parties because of, well, rich people. No, they believe that the whole entire federal government was structured in a way that was against the common people, such as farmers. These guys are going to favor railroad regulation. They want railroads to not offer abysmally high prices for shipping rates. They also will favor land reform. They will favor free silver. Free silver. That sounds familiar. That was something the Democrats adopted, right? Yeah, that's kind of why the populists will actually fall in the very late decade of the century, like the 1890s. After 1892, they won't be able to recover from the fact that the Democrats just yoinked their part of their platform. But the populists will live on in the mindsets of progressives and the Progressive Party. Same principles, same ideas, same philosophy, pretty much. Now, for political machines, we have to mention Tammany Hall. Tammany Hall was particularly a very powerful political machine under Boss Tweed, who was this political machine. Tammany Hall is going to be favoring Irish immigrants. They're going to help Irish immigrants. In addition, these Irish immigrants are going to respond to Tammany Hall with, hey, let's vote for the Democrats. Why? Because Tammany Hall was associated with the Democratic Party. Irish immigrants tended to vote Democrat. So these political machines will help getting more registered voters. There was also, in part, quite a bit of corruption being done by these political machines. So there was that. But, yeah, that's about it. Any questions about that kind of politics? Can we do a Kahoot? Kahoot! No, we're probably going to most likely do a Kahoot in Unit 9, maybe. Maybe. I don't know. But not today. I don't have a Kahoot plan today. Yeah, exactly. That's why I'm doing it. It's going to be modern politics Kahoot. No, I'm kidding. It's just going to be a bomb rush review, maybe. Either that or maybe during the exam tips review session. I might do a Kahoot if needed. Or if wanted. Or if able to. Hardest unit will probably either be Unit 8 or Unit 7. It's always on the exam. Who was president at the time? Which time? Unit 9 is not important, by the way, guys. You don't need to know anything about Unit 9. The Gilded Age, there were multiple presidents. Like Chester A. Arthur is one of them. He was actually the president who signed the Chinese Exclusion Act into, its existence. Yes, Grant will be there at the beginning. Starting in 1865, Johnson is technically part of it, but you know what? I don't care for Johnson. He doesn't deserve any credit for anything other than ruining Reconstruction. This is not a hot take. Everyone agrees with me. Anyways, yes, it starts pretty much off with Ulysses S. Grant, Rutherford B. Hayes, technically in 1877. Yeah. I mean, James Garfield is also part of it, but he died really early because he was straight up assassinated. You don't need to know a whole lot about the presidents in this era because they were just not really important. The only time you really care about presidents is when they actually expand federal power, and that's going to be Jackson, FDR. What did Johnson do? I don't remember this. Oh, he tried to veto a lot of Reconstruction legislation. Andrew Johnson. I'm not talking about LBJ. We're not there yet. Do you need to know anything about Calvin Coolidge? A little bit. You guys are getting ahead of yourself. That is Unit 7. Any questions about politics? Of the Gilded Age. We're in the Gilded Age. We're in the crappy era, Oh, I did fail to mention where the Gilded Age name comes from. There is a 20-minute LEQ going on after this, not a cube. So I will probably be done by 7, most likely. Gilded Age comes from the term. It's a term coined by Warner and Twain, Mark Twain, Charles Dudley Warner. They're going to write a piece together called "The Gilded Age." Do you want me to postpone your lecture? Okay, sure. Let me do that real quick before I forget any. I'll do that during the LEQ. But yes, it is like a turd covered in a very thin layer of gold. Exactly. It might seem all shiny on the outside, but it is quite crappy on the inside for a lot of people. That's where the term Gilded Age comes from. Anyways, it's an interesting thing to read. I haven't read through it all because I haven't had the time to, but I'll probably do that during the summer. Anyways, I think it's time to move on. That's why OSHA remains exists today. Yeah, we'll see if it still exists. Okay. LEQ. You have 20 minutes to do this entire activity. I don't know why I forgot to put in the 20 minutes thing. You are going to write a full intro paragraph with contextualization and thesis. You are going to pick 2 to 4 pieces of evidence. 2 is the minimum, 4 is the maximum. Please don't go overboard. Explain how they support your thesis. I do not want to see any full body paragraphs. So maybe a brief blurb, like 2 to 3 sentences. 1 to 3 sentences is enough for each piece of evidence. But for the full intro paragraph, I want to see a real paragraph, something you would write for the exam. I'm giving you 20 minutes. So yeah, there's an extra spacebar there, by the way. As always, if you have questions, feel free to ask in the chat. Ah, yes, Grover Cleveland and Benjamin Harrison. Those are also Gilded Age presidents. You gotta do your context. You gotta get your basic points. If you can get a 5 out of 6 on this, it's just... How do you write a good contextualization? That's a good question. Your context should be sufficient enough to kind of set the stage for your argument. You need to explain kind of the background info that will lead up to your to certain developments in your argument, as well as the evidence itself. The background info that will lead up to your historical developments that you will explain yourself, specific developments, by the way. So, for example, with this prompt, you want, in terms of contextualization, you might want to figure out what background info is necessary to understand immigration and migration, to understand kind of the political and social landscape in this era. And this is not just the Gilded Age, this will encompass part of the market revolution. Fun fact, they did not consider Italians as white people during the Gilded Age. I think that's what you are talking about. Yes, that is something they did. The notion of someone being white has been changed quite quickly. Yes, there were no quotas. There were no like actual immigration quotas. That comes later in the 20s. Also 1924 Immigration Act. Quotas. This is for Unit 7, guys. No, these quotas were mainly for every immigrant group. So yes, it also included Eastern Europeans, but it also included Asians as well. Also, y'all are looking at Unit 7 when you should be looking at Unit 6, Unit 4 through 6. Like, calm down with the immigration discussion. I know we love to discuss it. We'll be doing a lot of that in Unit 9. Usually the periods that College Board uses for LEQs sometimes span over 2 units. And that's what we're technically looking at. Are you guys particularly struggling with the context? It is a wide period, but again, it is just... To answer your question, Rox, yes, you could talk about those. Remember, it says migration and immigration. Now, you don't have to necessarily tackle both, but you can talk about one or the other. To answer your question, yes, you could talk about railroad industries. Um, Sky's the limit. It's an essay. No, not the sky. Maybe the ceiling. Oh, I didn't even mention we are probably going to finish around 6:40, 6:45. I think I won't be reading through every LEQ though, or little monk LEQ. Yeah, you got 13 minutes left. Oh, East Coaster. No, I'm on the West Coast. Because of the railroads. Oh, I can mention this fun trivia fact. It's the railroads, Falcon. It's the railroads. The reason why we have 4 time zones. The Great Migration is going to mainly be discussed in Unit 7. Yes, Great Migration involves African Americans, which is again Unit 7. For those of you recording who are hearing whatever it is I'm doing, I am simply ripping out pages. Focus, guys, you gotta lock in. 10 minutes left. You will get 3 options for the LEQ, yes. Sometimes College Board asks about culture. It has before, like national identity or national culture. Um, I don't know if it's going to be likely for this year, though. SG, your context. It is technically not the French Revolution. It would be the Napoleonic Wars you are referring to. Um, your thesis is your thesis as immigrants integrated to populist party. That sentence is that your thesis? Okay. So, you need to be a little bit more specific. You also didn't really evaluate the extent. You just said that they played a role. What kind of role? How? What was the magnitude of it? Um, as seen through their contribution to increased nativism and increase in their support for the populist party. Who is there in that last part? Their support for the populist party? Is it the immigrants or is it the nativists? So there are some questions that the thesis is not really clear um, in what it is arguing and what your evidence would be. As for your context, you it's okay. There are some details, um, but I think you are also kind of being a bit too hyper specific with the first wave of immigration. You want to evaluate it over a period of time from 1820 to 1900. Take a stance. Yes. Forced migration. All right. So Rimu, your little blurb there. Your thesis is kind of restated in a more specific way. The first and last sentence. I would just remove the first sentence and keep the last sentence. Um, I do like that last thing you talked about, redefining the makeup of cities and labor systems. Go more into that. As for reinforcing federal expansionist policies, um, I'm not quite. I know you're talking about to the forced migration from Native Americans. However, is that really the only thing that is enforcing that kind of policy? I don't really think so. And that would depend on how you would argue this. As for nativist political movements, the fact that they are there is not going to be really enough. I see in your context that you did mention people will respond to it for nativism. So that is okay, I guess, actually. Um, your context uh, is a little kind of, you're kind of jumping around between Native Americans and the European immigrants. Um, hmm, yeah. I will give my 2 cents into this discussion. Okay, so there's uh, some context here being established regarding the railways. That was a good kind of instinct. Um, Market nationalization, good instinct as well. I do take up issue with a part of your argument regarding influence politics by encouraging prospective presidents to favor their interests and campaign on common man platforms that prioritize their lives. Um, this is not going to be true for the unions. Very often, unions will be on the losing side of battle, mainly due to the siding of the federal government or the state government with business leaders. I already also mentioned the right to contract part. That is also going to be a factor. Um, so yeah, your thesis is standing a little bit on Unit 7 territory, even though it's outside of the time period of this LEQ. Um, okay, there's a lot of reading to do. I don't think I can go through all of this. Take a look at the context a little bit more in depth for this. Yeah, the context is fairly solid. Needs improvements in kind of this last part. However, the underlying anti-immigrant sentiments that permeated all the way to all because of the massive shifts in demographics during this period. You kind of dropped in the you dropped a little bit of the in the the specificity and also the kind of um, base that would make your thesis a little bit more cohesive. 15 minutes away from the end of the lecture, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to move on. So, which means that I have to skip on giving Z and Magical Shark their feedback. Um, but yeah, first of all, do you guys feel like you have any questions about the content? I will talk about the LEQ after this, by the way. If I have time. All right. So, for this LEQ, some things you might could what you could have looked at would include the market revolution. Some of you guys mentioned railroads in your context, kind of the idea of developing an economy. That was a good instinct. These railroads will support westward expansion, and with that, you'll see the rise of migrants such as homesteaders and exodusters. And more often than not, these homesteaders will become the farmers that we all know and love in these farming organizations. As for immigrants, the railroads, the market revolution, the whole second industrial revolution as well, will give rise to large urban populations involving factories, which means that you'll have a stronger free labor market. That will attract a lot of immigrants. Um, does that make sense for some of you guys? Some of you guys, I noticed that some of you guys mentioned the Trail of Tears. That is a form of forced migration. Um, but I don't really see the clear cut connection between, unless it's for your contextualization that would permit the westward expansion, then I wouldn't see any use of it for an argument. Was connecting it to racism in period states at all? No, context can be within the period. Since the rubric. The rubric doesn't say anything that prohibits contextualization from coming from within the period. Some people do that. Is the whole industrial revolution? Are you talking about the market revolution? Because that's like their first industrial revolution, or the yes, you can use that as your context. The market revolution. That is technically within and outside of the period, by the way. You would be fine using that. Another thing you could talk about in terms of your context, you could also just talk about the pushes that immigrants felt. Some of you mentioned Irish and Germans being pushed out by the revolutions and the wars. Um, that is a little oddly specific, right? Because you also have a second wave of immigration within this kind of time frame. So you are providing the misconstrued idea that we only had not Italian, only Irish and German immigrants in this era. But that wouldn't be true, right? So that is one thing to take up issue with. Um, as for your theses, I saw some good things, and I saw a lot of things about the nativists. Which yes, it can be part of the social landscape. Thing is, none of you really gave me. I think some the ones that did give evidence that they would use happened to be at the end, and I didn't have enough time to read through that. I am sorry. If you did end up talking about evidence that would support the nativist thing, but for the ones that weren't able to give me the evidence, I didn't quite see clearly how you would connect nativism to migration and immigration in a clear cut way. It is possible, though. Not saying that it is a bad thesis. It is possible. It's just without the evidence, I can't see. A thesis will answer the prompt directly, and you are going to give your reasons why. A thesis will say, well, if you answer the prompt directly itself, you would just give the extent. But also, the thesis requires the reasoning behind it, the developments. Wait, you get like a little context on the exam for the LEQ. I don't know what you mean by a little context on for the LEQ. Will you be able to clarify anything asked on the like? Are you able to have context like, oh, what does it mean when it says political and social landscape? Or what does migration and immigration mean? No, you will not be getting that on the exam. College Board LEQ prompts tend to be a bit more straightforward, though. This one is something I wrote. I did put in that we were going to do a CED walkthrough, but I don't know if you guys want to do that. Course and exam description. Alright, we got 7 minutes left. Let's bum rush through this. Alright. Oh, this is in period 7. That's the wrong period. Give me a second. Oh god, this unit is huge. Too much scrolling. Okay. Real quick, let me just get my screen up. Alright. Can you guys see my screen? Yes, awesome. Alright, cool. Let's walk through this. So the 6.2 is about westward expansion, economic development. I want you to know about such inventions that would lead to the rise of agricultural markets, what farmers did in response to these kinds of agricultural markets, some cons that they face, some flaws, things that government did to facilitate this development of agricultural markets, as well as the importance of all this transcontinental railroads, the mineral resources, and government action in building the West. Are there any questions about such examples? Someone has pinged me. Too bad. Cool, let's move on. Westward expansion in regards to social and cultural. This is the Indian, the Native American stuff. If you guys don't know about the tragic history of Native Americans in this period, start reviewing it, because these developments are all pretty much touching on Native Americans. So yeah. You didn't know about the Seal Wars, the Ghost Dance, as well as the Wounded Knee Massacre, and assimilationist policies that local and federal governments will take on. Any questions about that as a whole? Westward expansion. All right, good. Let's keep on going. The New South. New South was a term. The idea that the South should adopt kind of an industrialized, economy, that failed for the most part. Why? Well, it was still dominantly agriculturally based, with sharecropping and tenant farming, ways of supplying labor for agricultural jobs. You'll also see the rise of Jim Crow. Plessy v. Ferguson is going to uphold that with the separate but equal doctrine, right? African Americans are not just going to sit there, they are going to fight back against all this. Example, Ida B. Wells. Her name there, you should know that. Also, Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. You should read on this too, by the way, the Wilmington coup. It's a straight up overthrow of local government. 6.5, there's nothing much to be said here. No examples of technological innovation such as the light bulb, the phonograph, the telephone, elevators, automobiles, the Bessemer process. Anything that happened in the Second Industrial Revolution is fair game here. Now, the rise of industrial capitalism. You need to know how businesses, trusts, are built, how these huge corporations are done. Through vertical and horizontal integration, you need to understand what came with that, how marketing and management developed. You need to understand what businesses will do outside of the U.S. Actually, this is not the most important other than, the things they did in Hawaii. There were also a lot of oiling in Latin America. That is also another example. Let me check the chat if there are any questions. Wait, there was no light before that period? I mean the electric light bulb. Yeah, they used to use candles that involved blubber. Taylorism, scientific management, part of it. Was segregation worse in the South? It's just bad, period. The argument of whether or not the conditions that African Americans faced in the South got better or worse throughout the period is something that I don't want to take up as a debate. But segregation was still bad in some ways. It does hinder education of African American children in a lot of ways. So yeah, brief summary of that. The AP Gov review Unit 2 is going to be soon. So if you guys want to go there, I don't know if any of you guys are in that class, but that is in 2 minutes. So let's keep on moving. Rise of... we're going to skip this. Technological stuff, we already know this. Labor in the Gilded Age. You need to know examples of labor unions such as the Knights of Labor, the AFL. You need to know what they do. Strikes. They need to negotiate for better conditions and all that. You need to know that labor became a powerful force because of the fact that it was growing at a rapid pace due to, immigration and migration. And again, cities will become really huge because of these large immigration waves. We're going to see the rise of ethnic enclaves as well due to these huge immigration waves, because then more often than not, they're going to be staying in large urban centers. As for the responses to those, there were racist responses such as nativism. Social Darwinism is a justification of all this thing. The eugenics movement will rise out of this. There will also be attempts at limiting immigration through legislation, such as the Chinese Exclusion Act. And after that, there will be attempts at assimilation or Americanization, kind of suppressing culture. In many ways, discrimination was very common to these immigrants. However, settlement houses will be ways for immigrants to adapt to these urban areas well enough through vocational schooling. Any questions so far? No? Alright. Let's keep on going. Middle class. You need to know that there are clerical jobs and they are important for the development of the middle class. Why? Better wages. A lot of leisure time is a result of this. The growing consumer culture. We don't really see it quite as strong as we will see in the 50s. But yeah, in addition, we will see the rise of philanthropy through Carnegie's Gospel of Wealth. And they will make contributions to those educational opportunities in urban environments, medical science, to improve certain conditions, but that doesn't, absolve them of all the bad conditions they chose to inflict on those people. But that is one thing worth mentioning as well. Roosevelt, no, Conwell. Reform. You should know a variety of reform movements. Advocates of social gospel, socialism. Utopist ideas was Edward Bellamy's looking backward, the idea, but that is also an adaptation of socialism in some ways, at least the way they presented it. Agrarians, that will be mainly the populist movement, not the Populist Party or the People's Party per se, but there will be calls for that, right? Land reform, regulation of railroads, that kind of platform. Women will join all this. They will go to college because we have a bunch of colleges, specifically the Seven Sisters. They will join voluntary organizations such as the Christian Temperance Union, Women's Christian Temperance Union. And with all this social and political reform, suffrage will also be included in that kind of framework of reform. Controversies basically understand the arguments over laissez-faire, as well as understand that the U.S. will try to do some stuff regarding markets and natural resources abroad. In Hawaii, I think the natural resource part might have involved Alaska. And this will lead us to the kind of whole imperialism debate in Unit 7. Finally, politics in the Gilded Age. That is finally. Understand the platforms of the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, and the People's Party. You need to understand what issues they were going over. You also need to understand why the Populist Party rises up. Quite simple. And you also need to understand what political machines are and what they do in terms of the political landscape of the Gilded Age. Now, we've reached the end. Are there any questions about this entire unit? No? Yes, the grunge organization will be in this unit. A farming organization that advocates, an early farming organization actually, that will advocate for regulation on railroads, cooperative buying, and loans, government loans to farming communities. The Farmers Alliance will come after, and they will adopt a similar platform. Unit 6 is one of the most important. Yes, the Chinese Exclusion Act is in this period, in 1882. This period ends in 1898. That's regarding the responses to immigration. Other units you should know. Unit 7, 8. Know Unit 5 very well. How important is it to memorize the timeline? You should understand the framework and the timing, the timed framework you are working in. Because if you're doing an LEQ and you give evidence that is suddenly outside of the time frame, not in the same period most of the time, then that's kind of awkward. Because you're going outside the period. What about Pendleton Civil Service? I know it's a reform for corrupt practices in Canada, but was it? Yes, that is in period 6. The Pendleton Civil Service Act will be passed in around 1883, I believe. Let me check that real quick, because I think I wrote it in my notes. Yes, that will be passed in 1883. James Garfield was assassinated in 1881. Most important part in this period to remember. Understand reform and populists, I guess, is the first priority. Uh, Industrial capitalism is also very important to remember in this period. Understanding what that is and what monopolies are, trusts, and how they kind of, grew. A lot of this will be on. All of this unit is on the economy and society. I don't know what you mean by or framework. You forced your classmates to join. Call them out. I'm kidding. Most likely, period 9 is going to show up in the MCQ. That's it. You won't really see. Once they extended it to the SAQ, but it was like one of the ones where you could pick between that and the other. We will not see Trump. We will not likely see Obama. We will mainly see a wide range from the Reagan administration to probably the Clinton administration at the latest. I don't think they will. It's likely they will get to Bush Jr.'s administration. Less than 2 weeks. Focus on your writing, your FRQs, and focus on knowing your stuff. So content. In order to make sure it's called A push and not old A push. I don't know, to make it complete. Were union strikes considered reform? Or strikes and unions will favor reform. Were there any strikes that actually worked well? Pullman did not work. The Homestead did not work. Those are the main significant strikes that you should know. For the most part, we don't see a lot of reform being pushed by the labor unions that will actually make it through Congress and the federal government, simply due to the state and federal government most likely siding with business leaders. In fact, that's how the Homestead and the Pullman strikes failed. Pullman strikes, they just literally put U.S. mail on the cars and they're like, hey, you're interfering with U.S. mail, and then Cleveland just kind of intervened. They would most likely not add 9/11 to that question. Where I find it similar, it seems like an easy way to find. So they don't post their MCQs. Closest thing you'll get regarding MCQs will come from either AP Classroom or the CED that has sample questions in it. Course and exam description. That is the document I am on right now. You need to know education, art stuff for reform. Education, yes, you should understand educational opportunities being expanded in this era. Where can I take practice exams outside of College Board? I wouldn't know. I'm sorry. Yeah, so what they did is they ordered the exam, and they're pretty much self-studying it. Any people to know for Unit 6? A variety of people. Jane Addams as a reformer. You might Want to know Henry George as a reformer as well. Jacob Reese as one of our early muckrakers. Maybe William Jennings Bryan as one of the guys that ran on the populist platform. Andrew Carnegie, Rockefeller. Mainly those individuals. Maybe if you want to, you could learn about J.P. Morgan. But that's about it. Individuals, you might also learn Booker T. Washington. He might also be someone that you might want to know. Okay, any more questions about A Push? Because I am hungry and I want to eat food. And also, I have to get to work on my work for my midterm. Perchance, Rush, perchance. Go ahead. All right. Thank you so much. I'm going to end the lecture off here. If you have any questions, feel free to come in during office hours. That will be on Sunday after our speed run through Unit 7. Because I have to push back Unit 7 Part 1 to Sunday, which is on the same day as Unit 7 Part 2, which was also pushed back to Sunday last week, which is on the same day as Unit 8 Part 1. So 6 hours of lecturing for that day. But I did it because I got a midterm, and I don't want to be distracted by that when, I'm Unit 7 and Unit 8 are pretty consequential in A Push. All right, that's the end of it.